Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending on which part of the world you happen to be. Well, I am presenting the case of Malta, but at the moment I am in Athens on a work trip. So I feel very much like a part of the digital nomad tribe at the moment. Um, just to introduce, maybe for those of you who are not so familiar with the islands of Malta, unlike the previous two destinations, Mexico and Costa Rica, Malta is a very small island in the middle of the Mediterranean. You have a map here so that maybe you can place it geographically if it's difficult for you. Um, so basically, Malta is a small state. We have three islands, Malta, Gozo, and Comino. We have a population of 500,000 residents. So being a small area of 316 square kilometer with such high population, this of course means that the density is very high. We have around 3 million tourists visiting the islands. That is, we have 6 tourists per resident, which is very high, the tourism intensity. And of course, the situation presents various challenges concerning decision making at policy level and operational level for sustainable development. Just to make you familiar with the structure in Malta, we have the Ministry for Tourism, who is responsible for policy development, and the Malta Tourism Authority is the implementing agency, and the MTA is not only responsible of marketing the islands overseas, but also for product development, and we also license various different tourism service providers as well. Although we are a small island, we have the offer is very varied. We have a high cultural, a strong cultural offer. Also, of course, the mild temperatures and the coast are big attractions to tourists, but we also have English language students who come to Malta to improve their English language, because English is the second official language in Malta following Maltese. We also have diving tourists who come to Malta for diving purposes, relaxation. So although we are small, the offer is very varied. So of course we have competing industries, and also within the tourism itself, competing use for the limited resources, especially land and water. In the case of Malta, we highly depend on desalination plants. Water is a scarce resource, like land. So of course, the concept of sustainability is very important. And in this regard, Malta is investing significant effort in developing indicators for sustainable tourism in the areas of environmental, economic, and also socio-cultural. In the Maltese Islands, we have a lot of research on tourism. So research has been a strong priority for Malta for many years. I joined the authority 25 years ago, and we already had a research unit within the authority. And since then, the research program over the years became even more sophisticated. The objective of today is to focus on the socio-cultural dimension, and which is basically residents' attitudes and perceptions on tourism activity in Malta. This is important for a country to measure for many purposes. There is the positive dimension. Most of the time we mention the social impact to refer to the negative impacts of tourism, unfortunately, but there are a lot of positive aspects, of course, which we cannot take for granted, such as employment opportunities the industry creates, cultural preservation, and also the community well-being. However, it's important also to measure the negative impacts and the perceptions of residents on the negative impacts of tourism in a way to improve the evidence-based intelligence for better policy formulation. Local hospitality is also a key unique selling proposition for many countries, and a loss of hospitality would be a big pity due if it comes especially from let's say negative perceptions of residents towards tourists. It's something which ideally is avoided. So I'm very happy to see that more countries are investing in measuring the social impact of tourism. And I'm also happy to see that most of the indicators we measure in Malta are also in line with the ones adopted by other destinations, which were presented before in Mexico and Costa Rica. Next, please. So basically, the study in Malta is based on extensive literature review. The social impact of tourism was one of the data gaps identified in 2018 in Malta. Actually, however, the first attempt to measure local residents' perceptions dates back to 2000, so 24 years ago, um, uh, when uh, when an MTA was set up to take over the responsibilities of its predecessor, NTOM, which was solely responsible for marketing Malta overseas. This sort of restructuring brought about this sensitive subject, higher sensitivity towards this subject. However, back then, the approach we used compared to today was more simplistic in nature. The methodology chosen for Malta is based on extensive literature review. And we believe that the model developed by Bowley and applied in the US in rural communities is one of the, let's say, most holistic and widespread models, which incorporates a lot of variables developed by other academics prior to the study. This approach is of a quantitative nature in structure, in is in methodology. It's a quantitative study, and it is based on 7 constructs, and each construct has a list of variables which are evaluated, like we have seen before, on the measures from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So what are the 7 constructs? The 7 constructs mainly relate to psychological empowerment, which is basically the sense of pride. When you have tourists in the country appreciating your culture, the residents benefit from a sense of pride. And that the psychological empowerment reflects that construct. Social empowerment is the sense of community that tourism brings about. Political empowerment refers to the involvement of residents, their sense of involvement in political decisions. Then we have positive impacts of tourism, residents' perceptions on positive impacts, residents' perceptions on negative impacts, and ultimately, then we have the measurement of support for tourism, whether the support from the residents towards tourism activity is high or low. So this is the methodology and the constructs we use. In the case of Malta, the sample size was 500. It was a stratified sample based on age, gender, and location of residence. Although we are small, we still divide Malta in different districts. And according to the electoral register, basically, we use the same methodology to distribute the sample accordingly. We had a 95% confidence interval with an error of plus or minus 4%. Next, please. One of the priorities we believe is that we need to strike a balance between international comparability and conceptual circumstances. Um, uh, from an international platform, we emphasize on the importance of international comparability, and it's very important that we have indicators which we can compare and benchmark with other destinations. And this is one of the reasons why in Malta we opted for this methodology. Why? Because basically this model, as I have explained, was developed in the USA. it was applied in rural counties. Then, after that, it was applied by Visit Flanders in a city context in Bruges. And since then, Visit Flanders have applied this methodology in various cities beyond Bruges as well. So, being involved also in the European Travel Commission as a destination, together with Visit Flanders, the idea also was to adopt this model for international comparability and fine-tuning this model also for an island context. So in this way, we have a common model which is applied in three different scenarios: in a rural, in a city scenario, and in an island context. And when we applied it in an island context of Malta, we introduced new variables mainly related to seasonality, the seasonality dimension, like in any destinations and mostly islands, they go through seasonal patterns. Well, tourism in general goes through seasonal cycles. And also we introduce new variables in the relevant constructs, 7 constructs I explained before, reflecting the tourism offer, such as, for example, the coast, beaches, and to reflect the offer, which is, of course, different from a city or a rural county. So what is important is that while this model facilitates international comparability, which is very important because we can benchmark, as have already explained, it also accommodates these specific differences in the nature of the tourism product and offer. Next, please. So if we look at the results, I would say in a superficial manner, we see that the residents' perceptions on support for tourism in Malta is actually very high, and it is high. We have 90% of residents who believe that Malta should attract more visitors in the future. And this was quite surprising because, you know, we as a country, I've explained, we since 2010, every year was a record year with the break which COVID brought about, those 2 to 3 years break. However, last year we hit the record in 2023 of a new record of almost 3 million tourists visiting Malta. And in 2018, when this study was carried out, the situation was very similar. It was a record year with slightly less number of tourists. So as we can see here, we can say that we are very happy because the support for tourism from the local residents is high. And we have indicators like the Maltese Islands should support the promotion of tourism. I support tourism and want to see it remain important to the Maltese Islands. I believe tourism should be actively encouraged in the Maltese Islands. So these are the variables used for the construct of support for tourism. And from a top-line result point of view, we can say that the support in tourism is very high. Next, please. However, it is also very important to go beyond the top line results and delve deeper into the perceptions of the residents. And in this case, we approached this factor by looking at whether there were any differences between age, gender, educational attainment, and geographical location, depending the place of residence of people on the island. So the first overriding result was that the economic contribution of the sector, as the gentleman from Egypt outlined before, that is income and employment generation, is the most important factor behind resident support for tourism. So the best predictor of support is income and employment. And we can say what is nice about this study is that we can compare with other destinations as well, is that findings show that in the case of islanders hold higher perceptions on the positive economic impacts of tourism. So if we were to compare the mean on the positive impact of tourism brought about by income and better standard of living, for Malta it was 4.61, and in the rural county of West Virginia in the US it was 3.79. So in an island context, the support stemming from, let's say, income and employment and the revenue generation, which tourism brings about, is stronger than in other contexts. Next, please. And well, the text is very small, but here basically you have all the different variables, the statements, which reflect the measurement on the positive impacts of tourism. So, as you can see, hopefully, the highest refer to increasing the number of tourists visiting Malta improves the local community. Um, no, actually, the highest is tourism contributes to income and standard of living in the Maltese islands, and also shopping, restaurants, and entertainment options are better in the Maltese islands as a result of tourism. So from these variables, not only income, although income and revenue generation is the overriding factor, the recognition that tourism supports improvements in the cultural offer, also in the entertainment opportunities, and because through tourism, you can argue for more money to be invested in culture. So as a government, when different ministries are negotiating for their cut, the culture people, tourism can be referred to as one of the benefits gaining from improvements in the cultural offer, which is also not only of benefit for tourism but also for residents. So these indicators show that local residents in Malta are aware that tourism brings benefits which are also beyond the income factor. Next, please. However, of course, it's important to analyze the negative side of tourism activity, and the findings in Malta show that although residents are aware of the negative impacts that tourism brings about, however, negative impact is not a strong predictor on support for tourism. So although at the moment, that is, although they are aware of the negative impacts, mainly associated with litter, traffic, and overcrowding, I have already explained, the high density and tourism intensity in Malta. Although they are aware, they would still support tourism and even growth in tourism. So that means that the perceived positive impacts outweigh the perceived negative impacts. And as I mentioned before, however, the best predictor of tourism support is mostly related to the economic benefit. Next, please. And here you have a list of the variables under the construct of negative impacts. And I've already referred to the litter, overcrowding or in public spaces, and also in baiting spaces, and traffic as the three, let's say, most perceived negative impacts. However, there are others included in the list as well, such as the negative impact on the natural environment, for example. Next, please. So going back to the seven constructs, I referred to the negative impact, to the positive impacts, but we also analyzed empowerment in terms of, if you remember, empowerment is measured in three aspects, be it psychological, social, and political. And the three dimensions were perceived positively. However, in the case of psychological, the psychological empowerment, that is the sense of pride, has the highest prediction on tourism support. So when you do regression analysis, basically, the best predictor following the financial, the income aspect, the revenue aspect, and the economical aspect, psychological empowerment is the second highest. Social and political empowerment are also, let's say, high, but to a lesser extent. When comparing to other destinations, also, results indicate that in small islands, the social empowerment is perceived to a higher extent. In Malta, we are a small island. It's not like a resort, so where maybe tourists are cut off from the residents. Tourists and local people mingle together all the time. So that is why that is one of the reasons why the social empowerment is positive. Furthermore, the fact that the Maltese islands have high interest in politics, for example, in the case of Malta, if we look at the last general election, 85% of people actually went out to vote. So that percentage compared with other countries, it's very high. In the case of political empowerment, there was even a stronger relationship, and it was a positive relationship associated with support. In some countries, it was a negative correlation. In the case of Malta, it was positive and it was higher when compared to a rural or city environment, compared to the other destinations, basically using the same methodology. Next, please. So I mentioned also the importance of going beyond surface level indicators and looking at the results from different cohorts, the views of residents by age, by education, and also by territory, by district of residence. And although the support, as I've mentioned before, is relatively high across all these different dimensions, however, residents who are younger aged, also who have tertiary level of education, they who reside in the northern part of the island or in Gozo, which happen to be, let's say, greener and less developed compared to the other parts of the island, in those aspects, the support for tourism was relatively less. When I say less, it doesn't mean negative, but the mean values were actually lower than in other areas of Malta. Next, please. So, of course, we have mentioned how it is important to measure the indicators, and the ability to measure is very important, especially since the Malta Tourism Strategy 2030 was launched in 2021. And this strategy, is based on the principles of sustainability, the delivery of a higher quality experience, and also the fostering of a stronger bond between host population and the visitor expectation. The strategy refers to 19 policy areas. For example, the policy on airline development. Malta, of course, as an island, is highly dependent on air traffic. 90% of tourists visit Malta by air. Then we have other areas of policy referring to the management of different districts, the branding of the destination. In total, there are 19 areas. And to make the strategy accountable, Malta launched its Malta Tourism Observatory very recently in September 2022. And Mary Rose Briffa, my colleague from MTA, who is responsible for the tourism who is responsible for the tourism observatory, is here today also following the webinar today. So the primary responsibility of the observatory is to monitor the execution and of the strategy. I mean, many destinations, draw up strategies. However, sometimes many strategies, end up accumulating a lot of dust on shelves. It's important that we make our strategies accountable, and the launching of the observatory, and in fact Malta has recently applied for INSTO membership and is being actually evaluated as we speak. So evidence-based decision making is a top priority for Malta. As I have already explained, we are putting a lot of effort in developing indicators, also in measuring the impact from all the different aspects, be it economical, social, and environmental. Next, please. So, as we all agree, I believe we all agree that the measuring the impact of tourism on the community, the importance of measurement is understood, hopefully nowadays, by many different countries. It's important that we understand the impact, we gauge the impact, and we manage it. And the involvement of the local community in tourism decision making is essential for the appropriate management strategies. Ultimately, the government agenda is all oriented towards ideally improving the well-being of residents. So, of course, their perceptions are very important to be measured and taken into account, and accounted for in decision making. And what is important is that tourism destinations, and especially perceptions, are highly dynamic. A situation may occur, and you change your opinion or view about a subject. So frequent monitoring is very important. Ideally, such studies are carried out every 2 or 3 years in order to be adequately embraced in government policy. And in fact, Malta shall be redoing this study later on this year, hopefully in the coming 2 months. At the moment, we are collecting quotations for data collection, and it is very important that these studies are not one-offs, but it is a commitment for the long term also to continuously monitor changes in perceptions, and also the social impact of tourism. I would like to thank you a lot for your attention. And if there are any questions, I would be very pleased to answer. Thanks very much.